Ghosting is usually talked about as a candidate problem. A candidate stops responding, someone misses an interview, and a person accepts another offer and disappears. But what if ghosting isn't just about candidates? What if it's a signal that communication, trust, expectations, or ownership have broken down somewhere in the talent process? And what happens when that same kind of silence shows up after someone is hired? That is what we're going to be talking about today: ghosting in the hiring process, employer ghosting, and the connection between communication breakdowns and employee retention. Welcome back to Talento Talks, where we explore the people, leadership, and workforce challenges shaping how organizations grow, hire, and build stronger teams. I'm your host, Katelyn Ganz, and today I am joined by Stephen Smith, who is our Practice Director of HR Consulting at Talento HC's Talento Consulting branch. Stephen brings more than over 2 decades of experience across recruiting, HR technology, talent attraction, candidate experience, and workforce strategy. He's also the author of The Hiring Tree, Laws of Applicant Attraction, and co-founder of Applicant Pro, where he has worked with thousands of organizations on how they attract, hire, and retain talent. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Excited to be here. Yeah. Ready to rock and roll. So important topics, right? These are important things to talk about.
Indeed, especially in today's climate where there's mass applications,
Mhm.
AI, all these ATS tricks. It's very, it's a tricky system.
Well, we're going to talk about blame too. I love this concept because people want
the
to
blame
blame
game.
something, right? Yeah, the blame
Yeah.
game is very common right now in this whole process. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well.
Awesome. I'm excited.
I
Well,
promise.
well, before we get into ghosting and all of these things, I'd love to give you a little bit of time to share your background. Obviously, I mentioned that you've worked across recruiting, HR technology, employer branding, job advertising, and now human capital consulting with us at Talento. So if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit more about your career and how that experience has shaped the way you think about hiring and retention.
Yeah, so I started my career in recruiting right out of college. I was a finance major, right? You'd think I'd be in banking or something, but it was a mortgage company, so I guess I was in that field in general. But I met a gentleman by the name of Ryan Kohler. At the time, he was trying to build an applicant tracking software for smaller companies. Back then, during like the SaaS days, SaaS was nobody really knew what SaaS was, and it was one of those things. Usually you had a huge software platform, you'd have to download it or install it on site to the organization,
With the
and so
CD.
this exactly. So this was when SaaS was finally starting to take hold, where it would be a subscription model, and you would subscribe to it, and you. So we learned how to build this software to sell to organizations to help them with their applicant tracking. Mostly smaller companies. We started mostly with businesses under about 250, but as we branched and grew, I mean, we went from 3 employees to about 300 by the time it was all said and done, and we had tens of thousands of clients and companies across the spectrum from 2 employees to 20,000 employees, and so it just depended on what their needs were. But what I learned during that time, and what I loved about it, is that recruiting is truly marketing, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to market your organization. In fact, on my book, the first thing you'll read is Steve always says recruiting is marketing, and there's a reason for that. You know this, you're in the marketing world. You're trying to attract people to come work for you, and in that attraction you have to kind of sell the idea, because they're not going to come and explore more unless what they hear aligns with what they feel is, oh yeah, I want to work at a place like that. So I got really into job ads and SEO technology. SEO stands for search engine optimization, for those that don't know, which is typically used like to market your website and try to get people to visit your website. But the reality is you have to do the same thing for your job boards, because there was a company that was coming out right around that same time when we started Applicant Pro called Indeed. And they were using Google's algorithm, basically the same concept, to try to develop this job board. And now they've become the #1 job board in the world, obviously. So that it's been fun to kind of watch that. We had a very close relationship with Indeed, and so we learned a lot of the tools and the tricks, and algorithm, why the algorithm was important, the way you write your job ad, the order you write your job ad, like things of that nature have a tremendous impact on your ability to capture the right candidates that say, click, I'm going to apply for you because I love what I see. And that's really important. And so that has been the bulk of what I've done. We basically built Applicant Pro from scratch, and because of my experience in recruiting, we were able to build it. It's one of the few ATSs out there that was built by a recruiter. Because most ATSs that you get with a developer, you design it,
Yeah.
you throw it together, you duct tape it to a payroll system, and you go on. This one was actually built by a recruiter because I was involved in that, and we get a
Mhm.
lot of feedback from clients over the years and build it out as well. So it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, and now iSolved owns it, and they I think they have over 200,000 clients now that are probably using it. So it's good. It's made an impact in the market, and I was grateful for the experience. So
Wow, that's incredible. It's so, interesting about how much like minutia goes in to just the hiring process, right? Finding that
yeah,
perfect candidate, especially now. I feel like if there's something new every day to consider or new systems, to implement, things like that,
yeah.
it's you got to keep up.
Yeah. Well, and marketing is such, they try to pull you every which way. I mean, it's
Oh,
just
yeah.
like when we're marketing our position, we want to pull the best applicants that we can. And so we're going to do what we can to try to attract them. But transparency is still key. And you're going to find that you can actually mitigate ghosting the more transparent you are. And I think that's what a lot of employers miss as well. So we're going to delve into that obviously, but really
Despite ghosts
important. So
being see-through,
that's
transparency is,
right.
the
That's right.
main
Yeah, there's no
well.
there's no pun there intended, right? But I guess it works.
Well, getting into ghosting, it's funny, I think the term ghosting kind of came from like dating, when people
Oh yeah.
stop responding to you. But now we've applied it into all, aspects of everything, business, looking for jobs, friendships, even. But so when people hear ghosting and hiring, they usually think of a candidate who stops responding, not,
Mhm.
a company. But from your perspective, how do you define ghosting in the workplace or just in the talent life cycle in general?
Yeah, so ghosting, you can break it down to a lot of parts, but the biggest thing is communication. Communication is probably where ghosting occurs the most. I mean, think about it in the dating world, and I do a lot of relation to dating. In dating, if you meet somebody you really are excited about, and you text them and you message them, you leave voicemail or whatever, but then after a while you don't hear anything, after you the I don't know, the excitement, the warm fuzzies, all the thing, it's gone. It just
Yeah.
depletes. And so this can happen a lot when candidates, recruiters, hiring managers, employers, even current employers, when they're in that process and they're having the interview or the phone screen or whatever stage of that process, they basically disappear. And it's not always malicious, right? Sometimes it just reflects the expectations of the applicant. Maybe they didn't expect what you were offering, or maybe after you met with them briefly, you didn't really like what you heard, or it didn't seem to fit. Oftentimes, we see unclear next steps. The next steps are not well defined, and in fact the biggest area where we see that is with the managers. This is why there's slow decision making, and there's weak relationships between like the recruiter and HR and the manager, because the manager has this expectation. HR just wants to get through the process because it's another piece that they have to accomplish, and they don't communicate effectively. And when you don't communicate, you lack trust,
Yeah.
and when there's no trust, you start getting people notice. You don't realize this, but if I'm an applicant, I'm interviewing with an organization, I can tell when the manager is distracted. I can tell when there's no trust there or something's off. People can sense that. And the more they sense that, the more likely they are to ghost. And they just won't talk anymore. Because why do I want to waste my time on that? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the thought process. I don't want to waste my time on that. So therefore, I'm just not even going to respond anymore.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot that, goes into the why of or,
Hmm.
what is ghosting versus just like somebody vanishing off the face of the earth, right? Like
Yeah.
clarity, urgency, trust, something is lost there.
Hmm.
Um, so let's start kind of with the candidate sides.
Okay.
So why do you find or think, give us your perspective on why candidates, I mean, a little bit more, can you kind of touched on this, more why they ghost during the hiring process? Of course, you mentioned like, lack of trust things, but what about like offers being received, process being too slow, or just any other things you can kind of delve into there?
Yeah, the top reason I've seen is the process is too slow. It's too
Mhm.
slow. You're taking too long to make the decision. You have to remember these applicants, you're not the only one they're interviewing with,
Yeah.
right? You're not the only one that they're looking at. They're looking at a lot of other organizations. And the second, and in fact, this might actually be the number one reason, we don't really think about it as an employer from the candidate perspective. We just assume, well, this person is looking for work. Well, the reality is that person might already be gainfully employed somewhere. That person, typically they're trying to escape something. And we don't really know what they're trying to escape because we haven't taken the time to really get to know them, and where they want to feel valued and respected and they want to feel those feelings. They're not getting those feelings where they're at now, typically. And because they're not getting that, if we don't address that right away and talk about how we can be better as an employer, you can lose them in the process. Too often especially the beginning stage, we just want to get to the core of it and say, okay, what do you want for salary? What are the hours you want? Let me verify that, okay, you check all the boxes. It looks like you're qualified. And it's such an informal phone screen because you
Yeah.
can lose a lot of people at the phone screen stage. And there's not enough to, hey, let me just get to know you. Where are you coming from? Why are you looking right now? What is driving you to want to look for a role right now? And what would your ideal job look like right now? What would your ideal workplace look like? What kind of people do you want to work with? These are things that oftentimes we don't really cover in the phone screen. We just, too many of us as recruiters, we just want to check the boxes. And this is your first impression. Think about that. This is your first impression with the applicant. And if all you want to do is check the boxes, you are completely missing an opportunity to date them, if you will, right? If we're going to relate it to dating, to help them feel excited about hearing
Yeah.
from you again, right? So I think that's really important. There's obviously a lot, the communication, compensation, flexibility. The check boxes are still important. I'm not saying the check boxes aren't important, because if they're not there, it's not going to work anyway, right? Those are important. But if we make it a rote process and we just check the boxes without really digging deep, that's where we're missing a huge opportunity, because we want those candidates to feel connected with us. And if they don't feel that connection right away, why would they listen to us? Why would they respond when we start to reach out to them at that time? So I love emphasizing that concept of, yes, we have the check boxes, but what did they feel like when they were meeting with you for the first time?
Yeah.
This is our first impression. Why are
Yeah.
we wasting that? We're too often as recruiters, we're wasting that opportunity. So,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's important, those, like, it's a first meeting for both of you. It's you're
mhm.
gonna feel that initial spark, it is
Yeah,
these people I can see myself having conversations with
yeah,
further down the line. So yeah, I hear you. And especially now, like, I feel like I've been seeing all of these things about AI doing those initial, screening calls.
yeah.
People,
Why?
are just, they're like, quite frankly, I've seen them like be disgusted by it. They're like offended, and I don't blame them.
Yeah. Well, and
It's
again,
really
AI
takes
is
something
trying to
out of
do the
it.
checkbox, right?
Yeah,
AI,
yeah.
the reason you implement AI in that initial screen, because it is initial screen, right?
Mhm.
And that's another thing. I think we shouldn't call it an initial screen. We shouldn't call it that, because if you call it that, the candidate already feels this angst, right? It's like, oh, you're going to screen me. Nobody wants to feel like they're being screened in that sense. We already know we're feeling screened, or being screened. So why are you saying it that way? No, we should approach it at, hey, we want to meet with you. We want to talk with you. We want to know what drives you and excites you. We're not going to call this a phone screen. So, and I guess you can decide internally as an organization based on your culture what you want to call it. But I'd say let's step away from calling it a phone screen and really address it for what it actually is. This is an opportunity for us to meet, to get to know one another, to see if there's a spark, right? If we're going to relate it to dating again. So
I
anyway,
love that. Yeah. No,
yeah.
some little, internal marketing. Also,
That's right.
kind of puts everybody a little less on edge.
hmm
So cool. What warning signs have you seen from candidates when, maybe they're kind of getting that urge to become a phantom, ghost away? Are there
Right.
warning signs?
Absolutely. Just like in dating, right? So, there's one of the most common I see are vague answers.
Hmm.
They don't really get deep in. I call it getting under the iceberg, right? You think about an iceberg and you've got kind of the top, right? And you can see the person. Like in this case, we're meeting face to face in a sense, right? Even though it's virtual, but we can see one another. You can see my facial expressions, things like
Yeah.
that. And in an interview, we oftentimes have that opportunity. But if you are asking a question and they're just simply giving a vague answer, here's the kicker. A lot of employers just blame the applicant. They think, oh, well, this applicant just is giving me vague answers. It's not really good. You know what, though? What I have found in my research is half the time it's the interviewer. the person interviewing is not asking effective behavioral type questions that is actually driving the information and pulling it out of the applicant like we should. And so again, this is where if we constantly, in fact, there's this quote by Robert Anthony that says that when you blame others, you give up your power to change. And this is what recruiters sometimes do in the process. They blame the candidate. Oh, it was such a vague answer. They're so slow to respond, or they're just repeating stuff, or whatever it might be. We just want to blame them. Oh, it was a poor experience, therefore we're going to move on. And we forget that, well, wait a minute. How am I actually asking the question of the applicant? What is it that I'm saying, or how am I wording it that maybe is triggering to them as well? And so when a candidate is giving vague answers, the only time that should be a red flag is if you have probed a little bit more and asked additional questions and they're still being vague. That's when it becomes a red flag. But if they're vague at the beginning, well, how vague was your question to begin with? That's important, right? Another thing is obviously when you start the process, their energy level. A lot of us like to look at energy level. Are they excited to hear about this process? You have to remember a lot of applicants are already nervous, right? They're already nervous in these situations. And so it is our job to help them relieve that nervousness and let go of that take that wall down or that barrier briefly so that we can have a real conversation. If that's not happening, then again, whose fault is that? I blame the interviewer. You as the interviewer should already know they're going to be nervous. So therefore, I should do something or have something in motion or in play in my words to kind of tone that down a little bit and help them feel more comfortable. So those are, I blame the interview a lot, but watch for that. If you get vague answers, if they're slow to respond, sometimes they just want to think about it. They want to word it correctly because they're nervous, right? Don't be worried if they're a little bit slower to respond or if there's a pause. A lot of recruiters, they feel like they have to fill in the blank all the time. You don't. Leave the pause there. Regardless of how awkward it feels, it's actually beneficial for the conversation, and it's beneficial to allow them to sit there and think a little bit. But yeah, if they lack energy and things like that, if you're trying to record or not record, but schedule again, and they're hesitant or they've got a lot going on, again, those might be some red flags you need to think about. So how do we address that? What are we going to do? Can we clarify the expectations again? Can we ask them, well, hey, how come you're not, I feel like, say it out loud, be transparent. I feel like you're hesitant to meet. If you're hesitant, I'd like to understand why. Don't be afraid to ask. And so those are important things, I think. So we're not just always blaming the applicant for the answers they give and things like that.
I love the quote you shared because I agree with anything, there's needs to be accountability on both sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's the only way that anyone's going to improve, get better, be able to reflect. And speaking of that accountability on both sides, now let's switch over to the other side. Now we've obviously talked about candidates, but I'd love to talk about kind of employer ghosting. So employer ghosting and the candidate experience. So, employers ghost candidates too. I know, in the times that I have been in the job hunt, I've experienced it. I'm sure you have, know lots of people that have. So let's talk a little bit about that.
All of us. Yeah, so, one of the number one ways a candidate gets ghosted, or at least they feel they get ghosted by his employer, is they never hear anything after the initial application. Now think about that for just a minute. We probably get I think the average is like 220 applications per job in most cases. Now some of your higher level positions might be less, but we're seeing a lot more applications than we ever have in the past because of AI. And so, from a recruiting perspective, that can be daunting. I've got 250 applications I've got to look through and decide, okay, who are we going to narrow it down to and then get on with it. The reality is automation is such that at a minimum, I should be able to send a rejection letter and say, hey, we're just no longer considering you at this time. We've already reviewed our candidate pool. It looks like we have better qualified folks. And so we're just going to move on. That's okay to be, honest like that. And automation is such that every single one of your applicants should be getting a rejection letter where you have not moved forward, especially at that initial screen. If you are not doing that, not only are you ghosting the applicant, but think about it, this is a reflection of who you are as an organization. And that candidate could potentially be a customer. There are lots of things there that we have to consider as an employer. So if your process is such that you're not getting back to them to at least that initial rejection, that's a huge red flag. And candidates hate that. They hate applying into the abyss and never knowing what in the heck just happened. Now, one of the reasons why candidates are feeling this more often is because there's unfortunately a lot of bad actors out there posting fake jobs, which is sad. That's what's happening. And so as candidates, we have to be aware of that as well, that sometimes the jobs we apply for, they may not be real. And so we just have to keep that in mind as you're an applicant. Another thing that really frustrates applicants is distraction. When they're going through the interview, sometimes the manager, has their phone or their computer, or somebody knocks on the door, something's happening and they get distracted. And so they feel like sometimes the manager is not 100% focused on them. And when you are not 100%, like, I'm giving you me right now. This is me with you. I'm looking in you at the eye, all the things, right? When they don't feel that during the interview, they feel like you're ghosting them literally in front of them. That's what they feel like. They feel like they're literally being ghosted during the interview. Who in the world wants to have that kind of feeling? Nobody does. Again, it's like going on a date and you sit down and you can already tell there is no connection here whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so you're just doing the banter back and forth. Just, I don't know. I just say cut it off early. Hey, I don't feel this is right now. Don't waste the time. Yeah. Just be on, be done with it. Right. So those are huge. The other thing that a candidate hates is if you have them come in for a face-to-face interview, that does not deserve just a rejection email or a rejection text. That should be a personal phone call. Hey, I'm sorry to tell you, we're not moving forward at this time. That should be a phone call. That should not be just a simple email, especially if they've interviewed with you. Like, I get it if you haven't, we haven't even talked yet, so an email makes perfect sense there. But if you've actually had a conversation like this, whether it's online or over the phone or face-to-face, there is no question that an email is not appropriate in that situation, period. So anyway, so those are some things to think about. And then one last thing there, don't forget, ghosting also happens in the workplace. You've already hired them, they're with you, and it happens both ways. Managers ghost their subordinates and the employees ghost their managers. It happens. And we can't forget that, because again, it's just like the dating game. Just because I've brought you on now, we're in the honeymoon phase for a little bit for the first 90 days. Well, guess what? In real marriages that work, you're dating your spouse for the rest of your life, period. You are dating your spouse for the rest of your life. And if it doesn't feel like that, eventually you're going to see ghosting happen internally as well. So there you go.
For sure. Do you think that people, especially maybe once they're already working together in that ghosting curse, do you think people are even aware of it? Do you think it's more of just like getting too wrapped up in everything else that's happening?
Well, again, this is where communication is key, right? Where we have to be transparent in our communication. I think this all boils down to communication. Even in good marriages, if you're not communicating with your spouse, that's troublesome. And here's the other thing. If you don't feel safe enough to have the hard discussions and the hard conversations, that is going to lead to ghosting more than you will ever see it, and people leaving one another, right? We have to be okay with the hard conversations. And how many of our managers are trained to have those hard conversations effectively? Does that make sense? I see this way too much. When I was writing my book, I have a chapter on ghosting. It's chapter 13. And the reason I developed that chapter is because I met with over 500 managers, and we did this process and a workshop and things like that, because I was trying to gather information that was viable for the book. And I'll tell you what, during that time, I learned so much about how much managers are not trained properly. And they too are scared, right? They don't, how in the world am I going to have this conversation with Susie who's not performing well? They're nervous. Like, they go through some of the similar experiences that all of us do when we have to have a tough conversation. So how do we help them through that and train them to be effective managers? Because too often our manager is just somebody that would, oh, you were doing so good, let me just move you into management role. And they've never been trained to be a manager.
Yeah.
So those are important because we feel it. These are things we feel in the workplace all the time. And if we don't know how to address it effectively, we're going to continue to see ghosting have an impact on us. So that's huge. Yeah.
One thing that you mentioned, is like if you ghost a candidate, further down the line, that candidate has the potential to maybe become a customer and stuff.
That's right.
I'd love to talk more about, the business impact of ghosting because, that's one little touch point, but I'm sure there's a lot more, especially like internally, folks taking on the role of that
Yeah.
open role and, kind of, it's a compact value.
Yeah. Well, and there's so much there, right? I mean, think about it. If that candidate can be a potential customer as well, why would we want them to have a poor interview process or experience? So I have my own podcast called the HR Life that I do on the side. And we had a guest that talked about how he became really good friends with a recruiter who rejected him because this recruiter rejected him in a way that said, look, you're not a fit, but here's what you can continue to do well. So the number one thing applicants want in the process is they want feedback. That's the number one thing. They want to know why. Like, what in the world did I do that was so wrong? And so you can give them feedback in a positive way without making it negative. Hey, Susie, that story that you shared in the interview process? That was such a great story. That had an impact on our team that was interviewing you. I would continue to use that story in your future interviews. I know we're not moving forward with you at this time, but I will tell you that that story was great and you should continue to use that story. That is a way that we can give feedback and making it positive and specific to what they were doing, right? Without getting in trouble. Sometimes we're so worried about the legal implications. But, think about the other business impacts. So not only can you potentially lose a customer, think about the time to fill. How much time is wasted when hiring managers are not able to have these conversations effectively, or they're not communicating effectively with the recruiter and have an actual timeline in place. Think about some of the lost candidates, like some of the applicants that you're missing out on simply because you've been so focused on, or distracted for that matter, on other things, that you're missing out on the one that was probably the one, right? The one that you've been looking for to fill this role for a while. And let's face it, when you have poor candidate experience, there is so much transparency online today where people can leave reviews about your organization. And did you know that most applicants will, on places like, and most of us think of like Indeed and salary.com or Glassdoor, like, oh yeah, my employer reviews. Those types of reviews are just candidate people that have already worked with you and they had a bad experience and so they left. I'm talking about the reviews that you never see that are on Reddit, social boards, Facebook, Instagram, like those types of places where people talk about what it was like to interview with you, what it was like to talk with one of the managers that was there. Think about what that does to your reputation as an organization. Your reputation can be on the line simply during the interview process. They haven't even started working with you yet. And that's where those things are happening. So what that does is it also creates weaker referral networks. So when you need employee referrals, or you need, or you want to have people refer people to you, don't we want people talking about us in a way that says, oh my gosh, the interview process there was fantastic. You should go check it out. You should go try it, right? That's what you want people to say about you. And they can't say that when your process is not in a way that is effective, that communicates transparency, that doesn't feel discombobulated or distracted because you don't have a timeline in place and you don't have this effective communication internally. These are all huge pieces. And obviously at the end of the day, retention. We want to keep the best people. We don't want them to leave us, but they will leave us again if we went through the honeymoon phase and we don't continue to find ways and reasons to keep them with us, continue to date them, if you will. And I can't emphasize that enough. That is so crucial. And our culture, internal culture, will help define all of that. And so I think that's where consulting becomes so critical, because sometimes when we're in the thick of it as an organization, we don't see it. But when we can bring in an outside consultant that says, okay, here's us, right? What are you seeing? What are we missing that we don't see because we're so blinded by where we're at in our process right now? We're not quite seeing it. And that there's such a value there to have a third party be able to come in and actually see what you're not seeing, to give very specific feedback and say, well, here's how we can turn this around. And here's some options. Here's some ideas, and make that a part of that. I can't emphasize that enough. I've consulted with hundreds of organizations across the country, and I love those moments where it clicks and they're like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, we didn't even realize that. Like when
Seeing
I
the
had this,
forest through the trees.
yeah. Like when I had that group of 500 managers, this was with a specific client that I was working with. And when we had those 500 managers and we sat down and talked with them, we talked to over 2.5 million applicants to understand both sides of it. It was fascinating, the data that came out of that, because it made such an impact for that company so that they changed things that had immediate impact on the ROI. And who doesn't want to improve their ROI efficiencies and bring more revenue in the organization? Every business owner out there. So that's why these things are so important. Absolutely impacts the business.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'll share a quick little personal, well, not really personal to me, but a very close friend of mine. She was
Hmm.
been working with this company. I was actually her mentor for years before I moved on. For multiple years, wanted to go to a different city in a higher role, interviewed, I think 4 times, 4 different rounds of interviews.
Wow. It's a lot.
And yeah, and they called me as a reference. Like, it was very in depth. And
Hmm.
the manager, the regional manager, didn't even send her a personalized email or phone call. She got an email from the like district person. So the manager that she had met with 4 times probably spent, let's just say like 5 hours of
Yeah,
conversation, didn't
that's
even encounter
money.
it. And now, she's like, do I still even want to work at a place that, does this? So she's like, I definitely don't want to work at that location, because that
Hmm.
manager,
Yeah.
I felt disrespected her time, her
Yeah.
efforts. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. That's, it's just a personalized email would have been the bare minimum.
Yeah. Well, and again, you bring up a great point here. So are we being kind? I mean,
Yeah.
this is what this boils
Kindness
down
goes
to
a
is,
long
are we
way.
being, yeah, are we being kind? Are we recognizing that they're spending their time too? And so I think that's important. Time, honestly, is our most valuable commodity in today's workforce, time. And I can't emphasize that enough, how important it is that we recognize that. Thank you for your time. Thank you for
Yeah.
taking the time to meet with me, to talk with me, to have this conversation, to learn more about you. Gratitude goes a long way. And I do a lot of empathy and compassionate leadership stuff with Dr. Andrea Hollingsworth. I love her. I'm going to call her out. And she's amazing at this, because she says there's a difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy is you feel it, but that's it. It stops there. Compassion says I feel it, but I'm also going to do something about it.
Yeah.
And we need to be more compassionate, and we need to actually do it. Don't just feel it or recognize it, which is what empathy is, but actually do something about it. And that's where compassion comes into play. And I think that's really important. It's very, very eye-opening. So
Yeah, for
yeah.
sure. Well, we've obviously talked a lot about the human side, which,
Yeah.
in my personal opinion, is the most important. But, the topic on everybody's mind is really technology and automation. And, we've
Oh,
mentioned
yes.
it. And I know that you have lots of experience with technology, in applicant tracking systems and stuff.
Hmm.
Do you think that technology can help reduce, these effects of ghosting or the causes of ghosting? Or do you think that it maybe right now is making things worse? Like, where do you see the balance with technology and
That
candidate and employer experience?
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you an actual experience we had with video interviewing, because there's this concept called video interviewing where I send the candidate a list of questions via and they respond to me via video. Okay.
Mhm.
There was a huge drop off that we noticed with a lot of our clients back then, where the interview would go out, the candidate would either not record at all, or they would record, but it wasn't quite what they wanted. So the types of questions you ask are really important. What we started doing is we added the human touch, because we said, okay, well, what's missing here? And when we interviewed, the 2.5 million applicants, that's what the applicants were saying was, well, there's no human touch here. Okay, so well, what if we still did that to try to screen better, but there was a human touch? Well, how do we add the human touch? We actually had the individual managers record themselves asking the question. Even though it was a recording on the screen,
Yeah.
it was the actual manager recording it. And then before the actual phone interview would start, there was a brief introduction. And in that introduction, the manager or the HR director or the recruiter or whoever it was would talk about, hey, we're excited to hear from you. just know we do watch these videos. These videos are important for us because it helps us save time. They're transparent as to why they've added it and why it's there. And because they're transparent in that, and you're actually hearing from a human saying it to you, that's part of the process that you're eventually probably going to meet, all the difference. It was like it went from 23%, I think it was, up to almost 70%.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, significant difference. And so again, if we're going to use technology, how do we take that technology but still provide the human element to it? And where can we insert the human element where it will actually have an impact? And that was just an example of that, because most people that use those pre-recorded video interviews, it's to replace the phone screen. That's what it's for. That's the number one reason why they do it. Well, if I'm going to replace the phone screen, and this is also my first impression of the app that I'm giving the applicant, how do I still keep the human element there? That was so crucial, and it made a huge difference. So is there a place for that? Maybe. I will tell you though, I think it depends on the role. If I'm interviewing an executive, I'm not going to send an executive a set of questions for them to respond via video. I mean, come on, right? Does that make sense? Like, so again, we also have to think about the context of the technology. Where do I see that automation actually impacting the ROI while keeping that human touch in play? And that's so critical. And let me tell you, we tested it. In fact, when we first tested video interviewing about 12 years ago, believe it or not, this was a long time ago, during the Skype days and FaceTime and all that stuff, it was a flop. It failed miserably. In fact, we invested all this money into a company, and it was called Screeny because we knew it was purposely for that reasoning, right? To try to avoid the phone screen and or replace it. And it was a complete failure. And so we just scrapped it and said, well, we're never looking back. We're never going to do that again. But as new technology started coming out, we said, well, maybe we should revisit this, and then you can see the results, right? So I think that's what we have to do. I say yes, technology will absolutely help us reduce some of the ghosting, but let's remember, how can we still integrate the human element here so that the impression is still there, the feelings are still there. We buy on emotions, right? All of us in marketing know that people buy on emotion. Well, guess what? People will also make a career choice and a career move based on emotions as well. Because think about it, 70% of candidates who are leaving the workforce. In fact, Gallup just released their new one. I think it was still around 70%. 70% of employees that leave their current work leaves because they don't get along with their current manager or boss. Think about that. That relationship is that important. And so if you know that, if 70% of your applicants, and that's the common theme, then are we talking about the person they're going to report to here? Are we talking about, here's what people say about that person when they come to work with us? Here's what you can expect when you come here. Like, these are things we should absolutely be covering in the interview process that we're not. I mean, I don't know. I don't get why we don't take advantage of those types of situations, knowing that this is probably why they're leaving. Why in the world are we not addressing it? And why are we not bringing it up, right? As a tool, if you will, to say, hey, here's why we're better. Here's why you should come. Here's why you should choose us. Not in a cocky way.
The amount of time you spend at work, you should at least get along with people that you're spending all that time with.
Yeah. So those are important, I'd say. So yes, technology is huge. I love it. It's going to help support us in a powerful way, but it will never replace the relationship, ever. And we have to remember that going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's super crucial to remember, because I think we're so excited by technology,
and it's fun,
the new trends, and it is fun. But there's one tried and true way to deal with things, and it's that interpersonal communication, right? That's never going to go away.
Never.
Well, this has been awesome. Just kind of to wrap it up, for any, organizations or recruiters, or even, people who are on the job hunt, or even just, casually browsing, what are some things that they should take into consideration? What can they use practically? What can they start implementing right after they listen to this?
So first and foremost, look at your current process. And so I'm going to speak to the employer first, and then we'll talk about the applicant. So employer, what does your process look like, right? What touch points do you have with the applicant during that process? And are there areas where you're seeing the drop off the most? Are you actually tracking that? You know, a lot of organizations, in fact, most tracking systems, applicant tracking systems don't really track that effectively. I would push back with your ATS. Hey, part of our process is we want to understand why people are dropping off. Are we saying no, or is the candidate saying no? At what stage of that process? And I think that's something we should push back on tracking systems everywhere to help us manage that better. If we're going to be effective in that and intentional, I have to be able to track it to know. And so does our ATS effectively track that? So look at the journey. You know, a lot of us talk about the candidate journey, but I'm going to throw something at you you've probably never heard of: the manager's journey.
Mm.
And here's why. And in fact, I'm looking at writing another book right now, and I'm going to include this. So you're going to get it. This will be a precursor to this, but I want you to think about that for just a moment. Those managers that I told you about, where we had 500 managers and we interviewed them and did all these things with them and practices, we actually split the group in half. Half the managers, we created a timeline with them. So we created a timeline. Here's the expectation. It's going to take us about 30 days to get applicants. And then here's 2 week window where you're going to do the interviews. Here's a 2 week window where we're going to extend the offers and have them on board, you know, so that within the time frame of about 8 weeks, it's done, right? And we had the manager sit down and actually sign a document and signed off that they agreed with the calendar because they helped us create it, the timeline and the outline of what it was. We created the expectations, and because they signed off on it, there was this element of ownership.
Yeah.
And they're like, I have to stay with this because I literally signed off on this. I agreed with it. And so they do. The other half managers, we didn't do any of that. We just did the normal process. Here's what your normal process says. We're just going to stick with that. Well, for those managers that actually signed off on it, they were like 70% more likely to actually follow through with the time. And it was only off by about 3 days on average. Whereas the other group who signed off on nothing, didn't agree to a timeline, just did their normal everyday process, they were off by almost 4 weeks.
Wow.
Think about that for just a minute. From 3 days to 4 weeks. How impactful having the conversation with the manager, sitting them down, letting them help you build the timeline, and then having them actually physically sign it. It provided clarity. The expectations were there. We knew exactly what the response times were that we had. We could also be transparent with the applicants in the process because the applicants knew that this is our process. We want to make a decision by this date. And because we want to make a decision by this date, you will hear from us. Candidates, now on the candidate side, candidates want to hear from us every other day. That's what they want. They want to hear from us every other day.
Yeah.
And even if it's just to say, hey, we're still in the process. We had a few interviews. They're bringing things together. We're having a meeting on such and such a day, whatever it might be. They simply want to hear from you every other day, because as soon as it's longer than the 2 days, as soon as it's longer, the likelihood of ghosting goes up by almost 60%. Okay, that's important. So from a manager perspective, create something like that. Look at your structure. What does our process look like? Is the manager on board with it? Do we have this because the manager has a journey too. They're being taken from what they're trying to do. They've got a team that they're trying to manage, that there's time involved here. You know, are we paying attention to their journey as well? I think that's so critical from the employer perspective. Now, for those of you who are candidates, you need to know that not every organization is very organized in their hiring process. They're just not. And you can always tell. And you have to decide as an applicant, do I want that to affect me in a way that I decide I don't even want to be involved with this? Or do I, am I willing to accept it anyway, knowing that this is where I want to be and these are the people I want to work with? Because, just because the hiring process is off doesn't always mean the company is horrible, right? However, it does impact your thought process and your feelings, right? The emotions. And I think that's really important. So just think about stuff like that as a candidate. Don't be overbearing and literally want a response every hour. In this world where we have young generation, we're just so used to we text a friend, we send and then the friend doesn't text us for like a day, and we're like, what's going on? They haven't texted me all day. What's going on? Like, you don't know. They might be out partying or maybe they're on vacation or in a place where they don't even have phone access right now, right? So we just have to be patient with each other. We have to
Yeah.
be patient internally as an organization, patient as a candidate and a job seeker, understanding that they have their timeline. My hope is, though, is that employers can be more transparent about their process. But if you don't define the process and if you don't have clear expectations or clarity there with your managers and pay attention to the manager journey, you're going to continue to see the trouble and struggles that you see already right now. It's going to stay. If we don't make any changes whatsoever, how in the world do we expect to get a different result?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
look at your process. And, part of the communication between the manager is, too often I see managers, they just kind of throw the resume, the job description on the counter with the HR person and say, here's what I'm looking for. That's not enough. You got to
Yeah.
have actual communication. In my book, I call it the roots part of the process. When you think about a tree, the roots are so critical. And if the roots are not, that's the foundation. If the roots are not deep, they usually go 20 feet deep in an apple tree, as an example. If those roots are not deep enough and the conversations are not happening, how in the world is it going to feed nutrients to the rest of the tree? It can't. The tree will die.
Yeah.
And so are your roots and the communication that's happening there, are they happening effectively in a way that everybody's very clear as to what the expectations are? Too many managers have no clue what they want in the candidate. Well, I just need somebody that can get the job done. Okay, well, what does the job look like? What defines success for me? Like if I'm a recruiter, I'm going to sit down with that manager, define what success looks like to you. Do you have somebody in your department right now that has been successful? Let me go talk to them as well. See, we need to talk to everybody, not just the manager. We only get the manager's perspective and we forget, wait a minute, there's people actually doing this. Let's talk to them too. So those are some important things. Look at your process, make sure it's solid. And as candidates, be patient. Not all organizations are very structured there, unfortunately. And some of them don't have the best process. Sometimes it's just their executive assistant that's doing it all because they don't have HR, right? For small companies. So be patient with the process. And I know it's frustrating out there. So find people that you can network with internally at that company and try to make friends and see where it takes you. Networking, I think, is still key. Again, the idea of relationships are still going to be very valuable, right? Because think
Yeah.
about it. If you go on a blind date, it's a very different feeling going on a blind date with somebody than it is to go on a date with somebody who one of your friends is trying to introduce you to them.
Right. Yeah.
Very different experience, right? So yeah, there we go.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think, also just remembering we're all, at the end of the day, we're all human,
Yeah,
everyone's trying to get their job done or,
yeah,
just keep on with their life. So I think, just grace, the patience, all those things are important when, you're dealing with these processes.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
Stephen, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Like, I
yeah.
really hope that folks listening to this, can take away some gold nuggets because there are a bunch in there.
It's fun. This
Um,
is a fun topic for me. I
yeah, I
love this
can't wait to
topic.
have you again as, another book. You're gonna be
Yeah,
my number
yeah.
one podcast guest. Um, and for anybody who is listening to this, if this conversation raised questions about your internal hiring process or the candidate experience that you're currently facing or have faced, or your retention strategies, please feel free to check out our Talento Consulting page. It'll
Mhm.
be linked, the end of this podcast, and you can work with wonderful folks like Stephen. We also have Mary Chetty and Lori Villa. They'll be tagged in this too, so you can check out
Awesome
their profiles. They
consultants.
are, yes,
Yeah,
wonderful, wonderful folks. So we are here to help if you have these questions. And like Stephen mentioned, it's the outside perspective is truly invaluable. It's hard to see
yeah.
the forest or the trees when you are on the ground level of the
Hmm.
forest. So
Absolutely.
thank you again so much, Stephen.
Yeah, no, this has been great. I really appreciate it. And like I said, I'm very passionate about this kind of stuff. So,
I could
because you can
tell.
fix it. You can fix it, right? Stop blaming, blame the candidates, blame the managers, because too often we do the finger pointing.
Yeah,
Let's start owning it and let's make changes. So,
I love that. All right.
yeah.
Well, thanks again.